In this video, we're going to connect tables, equations, and graphs. Oh my. If you haven't watched the previous video where we connected tables and equations, go watch that first because we're not going to go over that part. This is going to be more focused on how to now do graphs as well. Evidence-wise, we're going to connect equations to graphs, we're going to connect tables to graphs, and we're going to connect tables to equations. Learning experience is there. There's actually not a second you do, so ignore that. But that's fine. Let's get cracking. So, for our first example, our mini lesson, and make sure you're copying this down. You don't need to make an exact copy of this coordinate plane, but at least sketch it out so you have it. We're going to make a graph out of this equation. The tricky thing is that to do that so far, you're going to need to make a table first. So I've already made a table. I've picked out my independent variables, and we're going to have to fill this in first. So just like we did in the previous video, we're going to figure out what is y when x is equal to 0 and 2 and 4 and 5 and 6. So, for example, y plus 0, or rather y is equal to 0 plus 8. So if if x is 0, y is going to equal 8. If x is 2, y is going to equal 10. If x is 4, y is going to equal 12, 13, and 14. So that's our first step, is make a table. Awesome. Again, write these things down as we go through them. The next part of this is going to be to actually graph what we have in our table. You might remember from way back in, I think, the 2.5 video, might have been 2.4, we talked about graphing ordered pairs. We had an x coordinate and a y coordinate. And guess what? This is the independent variable, and this is the dependent variable. So, if we take our table, we turn this first thing into a coordinate point, we can now plot that point. So we're going to be at x is equal to 0. Don't forget to label your axes. No, not that kind of axes. I mean the x and y axes. So we're going to start at x is equal to 0. Our y value is 8, so we're going to go up to 8. We're going to put our first point right here. Next, we do the same thing for 2 and 10. So we go to 2, we go up to 10. And this is where our next point is. We do the same thing for 4 and 12. That'll give us a point here. 5 and 13. And then 6 and 14. And when we're done with this, one thing that we get to do, which we didn't get to do previously, is we actually get to connect all of our points. And that should give us a line. And this line is representing y is equal to x plus 8. So, in terms of what step 2 was then, step 2, simply to plot your ordered pairs. If you don't quite remember how we plotted our ordered pairs, I'd suggest going and watching that video. It was, again, 2.5. I'm pretty sure I'll put a little thing up in the corner for you to click on. But that's it. It's not too bad. It is an extra step, but it's not a bad step, I hope. So, pause if you need to, copy this down, and then we'll move on to our first you-do, which will be very similar to this. So your first you-do problem for this video, you have the equation d is equal to 3c. This should look familiar because you did it in the last video.
Cheese.
Use the table, fill out the table, and then you're going to plot your ordered points on a coordinate plane. I would strongly suggest using graph paper. If you don't have graph paper, your teacher might have assigned it to you in Cami. I know I did. Or you can sketch it in just whatever piece of paper you have. So let's look at another example. This time, we're starting with a graph. So the first thing we need to do here is label our axes, because I noticed that they're not labeled. This is x. Remember, x is lying down, and y is standing above going, why? And then what we need to do is we need to actually make a table from this line. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for points that actually line up well. So I can see that there's 2 and 4, so that can be a point. I see that we have 4 and 8, so that can be a point. It's not labeled here. It's not labeled on our axis, but we know that this would be 3 since it's halfway in between 2 and 4. And here would be 5. So, not that we need the 5, but there it is. So we'd have another point at 3 and 6. Here, same idea. We have a 1 and a 2. So we have another point here. And then we have one last point here at 0, 0. So we've identified what our ordered pairs are, where our points would be on this line. Sometimes the points will already be easier to find for you. It just depends on the problem. And then you're just going to list your ordered pairs in this table. Our first one was 0, 0. The x value is 0. The y value is 0. The next one was 1, 2. The x value is 1. The y value is 2. Then we had 2, 4. Our independent variable was 2. Our dependent variable was 4. And we can keep going with this and see just what we end up with. This last one's going to be a little bit tricky to fit in, but I'm sure we can manage. So we have 4 and an 8. So that's the new part of what you have to do. After that, it's the same thing that we did in the previous video. You have your table. You're going to look for patterns in it, and you're going to make your equation based on that. So in this table, well, really the only thing that we can do to get something to be 0 is multiply it by 0. So we can write y is equal to something times x. So I have to figure out what that something is. What can we do to a 1 to get a 2? Well, we could add 1, but we're already pretty sure it's going to be multiplication. So we could, I guess, multiply this by 2 to get that. If we test it here, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6, and 4 times 2 is 8. So I think that works. So our equation would be y is equal to 2 times x. Now, there is a faster way to do this that doesn't involve using a table, but we don't know how to use slope-intercept form yet, so for right now, this is the way.
This is the way.
This is the way. This is the way.
So a few things to remember. When you start with an equation, first make a table from it, and then use the ordered pairs to plot your points. If you're going the other direction, you start with a graph. You can put your ordered points in a table, and then use that table to help you make an equation just like we did in the previous video. There's also, since we're dealing with graphs, make sure to label your axes. Try to keep them nicely spaced so that you can actually read your graph. But that's about it. If you didn't remember how we go from equation to table or table to equation, make sure you go and watch that video. It's pretty good. So, our suggested practice problems for today. There are 2 problems here. Pick at least one of them. You can do both of them if you'd like, but if you pick one of them, that's fine. The first one, you're going to make a graph from the equation. You have y is equal to 1/2 times x. The other one, you're going to make an equation from that graph that you see there. It doesn't look like the axes are labeled, but you should know which one x and y is, so make sure you label them on your work. So, hopefully that was a helpful video. Hit like if you enjoyed, and good luck.